A lone hunter took pity and saved a weak and pregnant wolf. A year later they met again, but what the hunter saw made him burst into tears. Michael was an experienced hunter living in a secluded cabin in Alaska. One frosty morning he set out for a hunt deep into the forest. The snow crunched under his feet as he carefully made his way through thick bushes. Suddenly Michael noticed something unusual in a small clearing. It was a pregnant she-wolf lying motionless on the snow. Her fur was tangled and dirty and her ribs were showing through her skin. Michael realized that the wolf was very weak and hungry. Without hesitation, he pulled out some dried meat from his backpack, which he had prepared for lunch. Michael carefully tossed a piece of meat toward the wolf. She sniffed the offering suspiciously before hungrily gulping it down. The hunter continued to feed the wolf until she was full. Looking at the exhausted animal, Michael wondered what could have happened to her. Pack wolves usually stay together, helping each other survive in harsh conditions, but this wolf was all alone. Michael decided to name the wolf Sarah after his late wife. He understood that Sarah was close to giving birth and worried about how she would manage to raise her pups alone. The hunter knew he had to act quickly and decisively. He rushed back to his small cabin to gather the necessary supplies. Returning with an axe, rope, and blankets, Michael got to work. He spent the whole day building a small shelter near the spot where he had found Sarah. Michael carefully selected logs and branches, creating a sturdy structure that would protect the wolf from harsh weather. Inside, he made a soft bed of moss and leaves, covering it with warm blankets. As the sun began to set, Michael realized it was time to move Sarah to her new home. He slowly approached the wolf, speaking soothingly to her. Sarah watched his movements wildly, but made no attempt to run away. Michael carefully wrapped her in a blanket and lifted her in his arms. The wolf was much heavier than he expected, but the hunter was determined to help her. He carried Sarah to the shelter, quietly reassuring her along the way. Once inside, Michael gently laid the wolf on the soft bed. From that day on, Michael visited Sarah every day, bringing her food and fresh water. At first, the wolf was cautious, but over time she began to trust her rescuer. One day, while checking on Sarah, Michael noticed a curious black wolf following him. The hunter was concerned that this predator might pose a threat to Sarah and her future pups. However, his fears were unfounded. The black wolf, who Michael named Smokey, showed surprising care for Sarah. He often brought her small bits of food and warmed her with his body on cold nights. Michael was amazed by the unusual friendship between the wolves and watched with interest as their bond grew. The winter was especially harsh. Michael continued to care for Sarah, spending more and more time with her. He told her stories about his life in the forest, and the wolf seemed to listen attentively, her amber eyes never leaving the man. The hunter, who had always considered himself a loner, unexpectedly found a friend in the wild animal. One evening, a fierce blizzard hit. Michael felt uneasy and, despite the danger, set out to check on Sarah. Reaching the shelter, he was horrified to find the wolf missing. The hunter began searching for her, battling the icy wind. Soon he heard faint whimpering coming from a small cave nearby. Michael found Sarah lying on the cold stones. She was in labor. The hunter stayed with the wolf, trying to keep her warm and calm. He covered Sarah with his coat, shielding her from the biting wind. Michael spent the whole night by her side, watching as 4 tiny pups were born. By morning, the storm had subsided, and the exhausted but happy Sarah was nursing her newborns. In the weeks that followed, Michael helped Sarah care for the pups. He brought extra food so the wolf would have enough milk for her. Young Smokey also stayed by her side, guarding the cave entrance and playing with the growing pups. Michael enjoyed watching the little ones grow stronger and begin exploring the world around them. He was particularly fond of the smallest pup, whom he named Timmy. This fluffy little one was the last to try new things, but soon became the bravest explorer. Michael often brought Timmy small pieces of meat to help him gain strength. As the end of winter approached, the forest became busier. One day, while visiting the wolf family, Michael heard distant voices and the sound of branches snapping. His hunter's instincts told him danger was approaching. He carefully welcomed his stories, where the line between the known and the unknown fades, and the shadows whisper truths untold. Tonight, we delve into the primal connection between humans and animals, a bond forged in trust, sometimes fear, and always in mystery, crept through the bushes and saw a group of armed men following the wolves' tracks. In the melting snow, Michael overheard their conversation. They said they had been tracking a wolf pack for several days. The hunters were worried that the wolves might attack livestock or people. Hearing the threat to Sarah and her family, Michael knew he had to act. Immediately he rushed back to the cave where the wolves lived. Sarah was already herding her pups deep into the shelter, and Smokey had taken a defensive stance. At the entrance, Michael heard the hunters' voices getting closer. When they reached a clearing, he bravely stood in front of the cave, shielding the wolf family. "These wolves are under my protection," Michael declared firmly, looking into the eyes of the surprised hunters. They lowered their guns in shock. One of them recognized Michael and asked why he was protecting the gray predators. The hunter took a deep breath, knowing that his next words could determine the fate of Sarah and her family. Michael began telling the story of how he had found the dying wolf and helped her survive the harsh winter. He spoke of the pup's birth and the extraordinary friendship that had developed between him and the wild animals. His voice was full of sincerity and conviction. Michael invited the hunters to see for themselves that the wolves were not a threat. The hunters cautiously approached the cave. At that moment, curious Timmy poked his head out. The men watched in amazement as the little wolf pup walked over to Michael and trustingly rubbed against his hand. The distrust and fear on the hunter faces gave way to surprise. They were astonished by Michael's compassion and the unique bond between the man and the wolves. "I've never seen anything like this," one of the hunters admitted, shaking his head. Michael seized the moment and explained that these wolves were just a family trying to survive. He assured the hunters that he kept a close eye on them and could guarantee that they stayed away from farms and posed no threat to people. After a long discussion, the leader of the hunters agreed to leave the wolves alone. However, he demanded that Michael take responsibility for them and ensure they stayed out of trouble. The hunter gladly agreed, understanding that he had just become the true protector of the wolf pack. When the hunters left, Michael turned to the cave. Sarah and Smokey stood at the entrance, their amber eyes meeting the man's gaze. At that moment, the hunter realized how much his life had changed thanks to these amazing creatures. As spring arrived, Michael knew it was time to let Sarah and her family return to the wild. It was a difficult decision, but he understood it was best for their survival. One morning, the hunter went to the cave to say goodbye to his friends. Sarah and the pups were already outside, enjoying the warm sunlight. Michael slowly approached them, feeling overwhelmed with emotion. The she-wolf wagged her tail in greeting, and the grown pups played at her feet. The hunter knelt, allowing the pups to come to him. One last time, each of the pups took turns rubbing their noses against Michael's hand as if saying goodbye. Timmy, who had become the hunter's favorite, stayed longer than the others. Michael gently stroked his head, trying to hide the tears welling up in his eyes. Finally, the hunter turned to Sarah. He softly scratched behind her ears and thanked her for her trust and for showing him a new side of nature he had never known. Sarah licked Michael's hand, as if understanding the importance of the moment. Then the she-wolf quietly barked, calling her pups to her. They gathered around her, ready to set off. Michael stood up and stepped back, giving the wolf space to leave. "It's time for you to be wild again," he said with a trembling voice. Sarah cast one last glance at her savior and led her family into the forest. Smokey, after a brief pause, followed them. Michael stood in the clearing for a long time, listening to the sound of their fading steps. He was filled with both sadness and peace. Returning to his cabin, the hunter took out his notebook and began writing the story of his remarkable friendship with the wolves. He realized that this adventure had forever changed the way he saw the forest and its inhabitants. A year passed. One autumn day, Michael was wandering through the woods picking berries when he heard a familiar sound. It was a wolf's howl, but there was something special about it. The hunter's heart raced as he scanned the area. At the edge of the clearing, he saw a sight that took his breath away. There stood Sarah, more beautiful and stronger than ever before. For beside her were 5 grown wolves, her now adult pups, and the loyal Smokey. Sarah's howl echoed through the forest. It seemed she recognized the place where Michael had once saved her life. The familiar surroundings, likely stirred memories, and she instinctively called out. Michael's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the wolf family. They looked healthy and happy for a moment. Sarah's gaze met the hunter's, and he felt as if she remembered him, recalling the kindness he had known her a year ago. Sarah held again, and this time her grown children joined in. Their voices blended into a beautiful, wild chorus that sent shivers down Michael's spine. He laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by this unexpected reunion. The hunter noticed that one of the wolves stood out from the others with its curious behavior. He recognized the grown-up Timmy, who still retained his playful spirit. Timmy took a few steps toward Michael, as if remembering the man who had once cared for him. For a few precious moments, the wolf family stood at the edge of the clearing, as if allowing Michael to see for himself that they were doing well. The hunter noticed that Smokey remained by Sarah's side, proving that their unusual friendship had stood the test of time. Then, as if by some silent command, Sarah turned and headed into the forest. Her children and Smokey followed her. Timmy lingered for a moment, casting one last glance at Michael before disappearing into the thicket after the others. As the wolves vanished from sight, Michael's heart swelled with joy and pride. He had always thought of himself as just a simple hunter, but now he realized that he had become part of something much bigger. His kindness and compassion had not only saved Sarah and her pups, but had forever changed him in ways he could never have imagined. Remember, the next time you hear the rustle of leaves or feel unseen eyes watching, it could be more than just your imagination.